Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the library this evening for another really interesting retirement-related program. I'm Michael Bellicosa, Community Engagement Manager at the library, which means that I get to work with a lot of partners organizing programs like this. And we've had Michael Alimo here a number of times over the last several years. He always delivers a great presentation with a lot of really valuable, useful information. Quick thing about Michael, beginning 30 years ago on various Wall Street firms, he's been serving his clientele in Connecticut and the New England region for about 18 years through his company, USA Financial and Tax Services. And his focus is on retirement planning, risk management, and includes such components as comprehensive financial planning, investment and portfolio management, wealth and estate tax planning, IRA and 401k rollovers, educational funding, insurance and long-term care planning, as well as tax preparation. So he and his company do a lot of things. And he's presented on a whole range of subjects here over the last several years. So with that, we have a little bit of a different component on this one that Michael and I talked about a couple of months ago, which is to incorporate into the discussion issues related to inflation, which I know is a word that everybody's been seeing a lot in the last month. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael Alimo and we'll have the program. Thanks. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? Good? So all those things that my firm does just shows you I'm getting old. It's a lot of years that we've been doing things like this. As Michael had mentioned, we have presented a number of topics here over the years. And Michael had said to me a couple of months ago, is there a way you can integrate quite a few of these concepts into one presentation? So he either gets all the credit for tonight or he gets some of the blame as well. But I think you're going to enjoy it. With most of my presentations, there's a lot of information in here. And the reason I do that is most likely I will not see any of you again, or maybe I will see you at a further presentation. So I'm trying to give you as much information as possible to help you on the topics that we're going to discuss tonight. So I'm going to tell you just a little briefly about, Michael, should I use the clicker or should I just, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so. So we're going to talk about the concept for tonight, 4 critical components to a successful retirement. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about myself and the company, and then we'll dive right into all the different topics here tonight. As a disclaimer here, this is an educational workshop for general information purposes only. And the information you're going to see here is accurate and up to date. And I actually will show you some case studies that I've worked on over the years. It's important to understand that they're not recommendations or advice. And the reason being is other than 1 or 2 people in the room, I don't know any of you. So some of the case studies I will show you are usually specific to that person. So if you have a financial professional or you handle your own finances, make sure that these concepts are appropriate for you. The company itself has a few different divisions, as Michael had mentioned. We practice wealth and money management. That's a very common concept for financial advisors. It's usually how they get compensated and earn their living. We also do a lot of retirement and income planning. Conceptually, we're trying to figure out what is the goal for your money outside of growth, outside of accumulation. Is it preservation? Is it distribution? Is it medical necessities? Is it to travel in retirement? Is it legacy planning? And so retirement and income planning is a big part of factoring what money might potentially be for. We also do quite a bit of estate and legacy planning, and I work in conjunction with a handful of attorneys throughout the state for that, elder care attorneys and estate planning attorneys. And I have found over the years that most attorneys, so if anyone's an attorney in the room, don't take it the wrong way, most attorneys can use the assistance of a financial advisor because they're good, similar to me, they're good at what they do, their trade. They're good at estate law, they're good at elder care law, but the finance portion, not so much. And so when I bring my clients into estate planning meetings, I think it's beneficial to add the financial advisor. We do tax planning and tax preparation, my least favorite part of the business, but it really distinguishes us differently from other firms. On a regular basis, people will come to presentations, come to my office for a consultation, and they'll say, I think my advisor's doing a great job, but they won't touch the tax issue. And quite honestly, they shouldn't if they don't have a tax background. So we're working in conjunction with CPAs, and we're doing tax planning for people as well as tax preparation. And then, as Michael mentioned, insurance does come into your life, whether it be long-term care or life insurance. There's a multitude of reasons why insurance comes into your life. So that is part of the company as well. And I've asked people for years, when is the last time these people got together on your behalf at the same time? And so that is the structure of the company, and it's called the full circle advisor approach. One last thing on myself and something that we practice at the firm. We practice what is called the Fiduciary Standard. There are two standards by industry. One is suitability, the other one is fiduciary. And a couple examples of the Fiduciary Standard: an advisor must place his or her interest below that of the client. We have to do our best to make sure the recommendations, if we make any, are accurate and complete with a thorough analysis. And lastly, the advisor must avoid conflicts of interest or disclose that. So we can't have our incentive ahead of yours, something that we've practiced since the company inception. So I'm going to urge you to certainly take notes, write down questions, complete the survey if you'd like additional information. By no means are you under obligation to fill that out. In fact, Michael, do you have your own? Normally you hand out your own surveys. Okay, so there is a survey in there. If you'd like to get additional information or contact me, that would be the way to do it, but by no means are you under obligation to do that. And learn. Again, I'll spend as much time as I need to here after the presentation to address questions, but I think to keep the pace of the presentation, it'd be beneficial to go through it. If there's something really pertinent, certainly raise your hand and I'm happy to stop as well. So here's some of the things that we're going to go over here. We're going to talk about inflation, taxes, Social Security, and market volatility. And these are, by the way, there's more than 4 critical components, but to get it in an hour, to keep dedicated about 15 minutes to each section here, these are the 4 that we chose. And the first one we're going to talk about, which Michael had mentioned, is inflation. And a basic description is inflation is a sustained increase in the general price level in an economy. Inflation means that an increase in the cost of living as the price of goods and services rise. And so next year, if anyone's collecting Social Security, they announced the largest increase in 40 years on Social Security for next year, 5.9%. And you have to wonder if that's good news. I don't view that as good news. It's the government warning us things are going to get really expensive if you haven't experienced that yet. So if that 6% increase on your benefit makes up the difference for heating and food and energy and things like that, consumables, I doubt it. So inflation, you'll see, can have a really profound impact here. Taxes, we talk about how much you must pay in taxes will vary widely based on your filing status, the type of income, and the amount of income. Money can be taxed in a lot of different ways, from pre-tax, ordinary income, to taxable and tax-free accounts. Social Security we'll touch on briefly. It's an important financial decision for most Americans that can affect the overall success of a retirement plan. And the last thing we'll talk about is market volatility. And this is really interesting. Market volatility and distribution rates, or drawing income, is something really important for people to grasp. We're going to talk about the change in the economy, and it can affect everything from the value of your savings to the income you receive from certain types of investments. So the first one here is inflation. And again, we're going to talk about an increase in price for goods, food, energy, can all increase over time due to inflation. There are many reasons why inflation enters our market. If your savings and investments are not keeping pace, how does that actually affect you? And so for many years, as long as I've been in this industry, a lot of people feel very comfortable leaving money in savings or checking or CDs or money markets. And the reality is, this could be a real challenge for what we call purchasing power. what will your money be worth depending on how long this inflation lasts? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. While you haven't actually lost money, so if you're in these safe type vehicles earning little to no interest, you end up with a smaller net worth because inflation eats into your purchasing power. When you keep money in the bank, as an example, you may earn interest, which balances out some of the effect of inflation. But when inflation is high, banks typically will raise their interest rate, but they normally don't keep pace with inflation. So you have to start thinking about purchasing power and what that safe money is worth in the future. What are some of the common causes for inflation? And you'll see that a lot of these causes here are actually happening in the marketplace today. Demand pull inflation is inflation that happens when the demand for certain goods and services is greater than the economy's ability to meet those demands. So right now we have what's called supply chain issues. You have to wonder, though, are these orders that are in the system real? Are the orders larger because people who need the goods know they can't get it, so they're doubling up the orders? How quickly is that alleviated? A good chunk of the world was closed for a long time. And so the backlog on back orders plus increased orders because of economies opening could go on for a very long time. Cost pull inflation is inflation where there's an increase of prices when the cost of wages and materials go up. These costs are often passed down to consumer in the form of higher prices for those goods and services. So there's wage pressure because unemployment is coming down considerably, and there's a lot of industries looking for workers. That means they're going to have to pay more for those people at some point, if not now. Increased money supply. Here's a big one that's going on. When supply is defined as the total amount of money in circulation, which includes cash, coins, and balance in bank accounts, according to the Federal Reserve. Well, there is a lot of money supply right now. There's been a lot of stimulus for a number of years, and the system is flooded with money. And this also is creating inflation. Typically, if you look at the history of money supply in the Federal Reserve, they're always late to the game. So we all hope that's not the case this time, but they usually put so much stimulus into the economy, and rightfully so, because a lot of times it's needed, but the foot is on the gas pedal so severe that it takes a while for that flood to slow down. So we're experiencing that now. Devaluation is a downgrade adjustment in country's exchange rate and currencies, and it lowers the value of that country's currency. So if you've been following the dollar, one of the reasons people are, in theory, so excited about cryptocurrency or that type of currency is people feel the dollar is worthless, right? We have high debt. The dollar's value has come down quite a bit. And so we're seeing devaluation in our currency. And then rise in wages, which is exactly what it sounds like, an increase of money being paid to workers, and wage is cost of production. And if the wage rises, well, then the cost of production is more expensive. So just about everything you're seeing here that is reflective of inflation is happening in our society, and it's happening globally right now. The big question, and this is a word, Michael also started his career in finances as well. And for all the years I'm doing this, I've never heard of this commentary called transitory. They're saying inflation is transitory, which means what? You know, that it's going to subside. Well, if you look at the history of inflation, it always subsides, but how long is that pain going to be felt before it subsides? So this concept of transitory means, quite honestly, to me, nothing, in hopes that they're right. And then policies and regulations, certain policies can also result in either a cost push or demand pull inflation when the government issues tax subsidies for certain products. So there's a lot of things happening here in the inflation world that you're going to start to experience on a lot of different fronts, from, as you know, car chips, production of cars, and on and on. Here's an interesting chart here on monthly inflation. And so one of the things you want to be prepared for, now this is going back quite some time. This is going back almost 150 years here. But you see there have been some very extended periods of inflation and double-digit inflation. I remember the first home I bought in 1986. I was a Met fan. The last time they won the World Series. And I thought I couldn't wait to go home to tell my wife we did great. I got a mortgage for 13.5%. And I felt like a hero. I said, we did it. We got 13.5%. And so the good news, back to some of the earlier commentary, is sure, if there's rapid inflation, you might be able to get a CD at 10%, right? But the question is, are you going to keep pace with that massive inflation? So you'll see it going back 150 years. There have been some very extended periods here of double-digit inflation. Also interesting, one of the jobs I had on Wall Street is I would study charts. So to me, this is a chart. It could be a stock, it could be inflation. But if you notice towards the back end here, for the last 10 years, we're averaging only 1.8%. Most charts don't stay low forever. So you have to wonder again how sustainable that is. And when you see the new numbers coming forward, we're in the 5 to 6% range now. So let's talk about playing it safe. A lot of people want to know, what are the strategies to stay ahead of inflation? And I wish I can tell you there was one size fits all. Some of this has to do with investing, and not everybody's into investing. It could be value type plays. Here's a concept of a CD. Here's a CD earning 2%. We'll assume $50,000. I'm going to give you 10 years of interest here. And that $50,000 at 2% interest would turn into $60,949. Inflation, if it was just 3% over 10 years, you'll see the actual cost of that money is $67,000. So in essence, over that 10-year period, you're losing 9.5% value on that money. Again, this is really important if you're a conservative investor, and there's nothing wrong with being a conservative investor. But typically in this fixed world market of CDs and money markets, it typically does not outperform inflation. So in this example, you have devalued your money almost 10% at the end of that time period. Let's talk about playing the stock market. So that's another concept that people look at. Historically, everything's different nowadays, but historically, the stock market in the early portion of inflation usually does pretty good, actually. But then if inflation gets so aggressive, it really eats into corporate profit, back to the wage and all the other things that I talked about. And so I picked a period here where we had very aggressive inflation from 1970 to 1980. And what I did is I gave you the returns of the stock market. So you're really aggressive, and all you're going to do is buy the S&P index. From 1970 to 1980, the 10-year return on that same $50,000 was almost 58% there. And you'll see that annualizes at 5.7% rate of return. So that 50,000 would have turned into about $87,000. Unfortunately, for inflation for those 10 years, we averaged 8.43%. So inflation was far greater than the rate of return of even the stock market. And unfortunately, in this example, you lost 45% purchasing power on that money. Again, I promise you, this is not an invitation to go buy the S&P index, but a lot of times inflation, there's not a lot of places to hide, but are you prepared for it? Here's a case study. And I'm going to show you quite a bit of my retirement software to help you understand the case studies here and inflation in retirement planning. So here's a couple, age 65. They bring in $4,000 in Social Security benefits. They have $350,000 of retirement savings. And we're very simplistically here going to grow the money at 4%, and we're going to inflate their expenses at 2% here. I'm then going to compare it to all the same algorithms here, but I'm going to inflate their expenses at 4.5% to show you how profound that can be. You'll see here in 2021, they're 65 years old. There's $4,000 of Social Security. The net expenses there are $5,000 a month. So the next column talks about net monthly cash flow. So they're short $1,000 a month. If they're starting with $350,000, you'll see that based on that assumption, you see the expenses there I've highlighted, they're increasing at 2%. This is a pretty conservative number that if you did your own estate planning, retirement planning, you'd want to assume that your expenses go higher. In this scenario, their money runs out at age 87 with 2% inflation. So not a terrible plan, but certainly if this were you, you'd want your money to last out much longer. What can change this? A higher rate of return on the investments, a lower inflationary rate, or lower expenses. Now we're going to compare that to the 4.5%. And you'll see here, nothing has changed. The Social Security is the same rate of return on the money, but you see the expenses are increasing by 4.5%. And based on that scenario, the plan loses 6 years. So this has nothing to do with investing, folks. This has to do with the profound effect of inflation. And if it's extended, you have to figure out how to at least keep pace with it. Let's take a look at taxes. In taxes here, how do taxes affect the economy in the long run? Well, primarily through supply side. High marginal tax rates can discourage work, savings, investments, and innovation, while specific tax preferences can affect the allocation of economic resources. But tax cuts can also slow long-run economic growth in increasing deficits. The rate of taxes can decrease the value of your money as well. So here's a perfect example. I give one presentation which is strictly about taxes in retirement. And I'd ask you all, if you had $1 million in your 401k, what is it worth? It's not worth $1 million. You want to figure out what is the tax effect of that money to determine what is actually yours, because that's all pre-tax money. You haven't paid taxes. Are you going to be in a higher or lower tax bracket in the future? Will taxes go higher or lower? So taxes we'll get into here briefly. Who knows the largest percentage tax increase ever on the federal tax rate? Does anybody know? Anybody want to take a chance? During the Great Depression, Congress raised taxes in 1932 from 25% to 63% on top earners. Now, a lot of this is being discussed now, and I don't have the knowledge to tell you what will happen with taxes because it's a political decision. You need all three bodies of Congress, the two bodies of Congress and the presidency, to actually change tax law. If you didn't know this, about 6 years ago when the taxes were lowered, they actually put a sunset provision for us, the general public. So the lower tax rates that are in place sunset in 2025. Corporate tax rates are permanent unless you get, again, the three bodies of Congress and the presidency to change it, which they're trying to do now. But taxes actually are historically low right now. The highest tax rate ever, most people get this, 94%. Now, it's in this progressive system, but back then, if you earned over $200,000, anything above that was taxed at 94%. So in essence, you got to keep none of it, right? The longest period of elevated taxes. The decade of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. These 3 decades, the top federal income tax rate never went below 70%. And actually, this was the last president, which was Clinton, to actually get us a surplus in the country. Right now, we're close to $30 trillion in debt. And one of the ways they did it was taxes. So the concept of taxes and the important components in retirement are, if all your money was tax deferred, how does that affect you if the tax rates go higher? The national debt, historically high. Taxes are historically low here. So this is a chart that shows you we were over 90%, and now we're at about 37% on the top rate. What if all your retirement savings, such as IRAs and 401ks, were tax deferred? Will higher taxes change your future? And again, in 2025, the tax rates will sunset. And if nothing else, they'll go back to the old tax rate numbers, which are 3 to 4% higher. So taxes certainly can have an effect. You also want to figure out what will your tax bracket be in retirement. There's this assumption that people think they're always going to be in a lower tax bracket when they retire. But when you factor in Social Security, pensions, required minimum distributions, annuity income, rental property, it's rare for the hundreds of returns that we do that people are in a substantially lower tax bracket. So here's a case study and the role of taxes in retirement. Again, we're going to take a couple, the same $4,000 in Social Security benefits, but we're going to increase their retirement savings to $750,000. The good news here is only 60% of it is pre-tax and 40% is in a Roth. So 40% of their money is tax-free. They decided to pay the taxes to get into a tax-free vehicle. We're going to grow the money again at a very anemic 4%, and we're going to inflate things at 2%. But we're going to use the 2021 tax brackets here. I'm going to compare that to the same couple, except 100% of their money is pre-tax. So they don't have 40% tax-free. And I'm also going to increase the taxes by 30%. So all I'm doing here is I'm using the same parameters, but the couple on the left, 60% of the money is still taxable, 40% is tax-free. The couple on the right, all the money is taxable, and I'm going to increase the tax rates. And you'll see here in this illustration, based on that $750,000, at current tax rates, the money would last out to age 94. Pretty good. And that's what you want to assume as of today. However, if all the money was tax deferred, there was no tax-free money, again, you see how the plan shrinks. This has, again, nothing to do with investing, and this one has nothing to do with inflation. All I did here is I assume these people have nothing but tax-deferred money, meaning they're going to have to start taking money by 72, and I increased the tax rates by a mere 30%, which is going to happen in 4 years. And you'll see the plan lost 6 years. Here's a very simplistic on how taxes can affect you. Here's an IRA that's earning 4%. There's $100,000. And in an IRA, you probably know once you hit age 72, you have to start taking distributions. What I did is I calculated the distributions for the next 20 years, and the value at age 90 would be $73,000 after the money grew at 4% and we took out the distributions. Meaning the total value of that $100,000 tax deferred money was actually worth $175,000 at the time of death. That's the 101 of requirement of distributions and the $73,000 value at the time of death. If I took out 25% for taxes, that's $43,000. So the end result for me as a tax advisor says, based on that scenario, that $100,000 of tax deferred money over a 20-year period was worth $131,000, partially to the person who owned the IRA, partially to the inheritance. I then took a 4% municipal bond, which you'll be able to determine how old this chart is because you can't get a 4% municipal bond any longer. And you'll see the same $100,000 and someone decides taxes are really severe and they could get worse. They're going to take that 25% hit up front. And now they're left with $75,000 to grow tax-free for the rest of their life. So this is one of the concepts we call paying the tax on the seed versus the harvest. The left-hand side is the harvest of that money. On the right-hand side here, someone is paying that 25% up front. We're going to earn the same 4%. And at the end of 20 years, that money is worth $164,000, which is about 30% greater than leaving the money in a pre-tax type of account. So the taxes can really have a major effect on the value of your money over time. Briefly on Social Security, I won't spend much time on this, but it is important. As part of the FDR's New Deal, Social Security was launched in 35 with the goal of providing economic security to the elderly, and in 56, they added the Disability Act, and it is the foundation of security for millions of retirees and their families. Some of the bad news on Social Security, and the reason I brought this in is because the reason it's such an important component to retirement is why. A lot of people feel there's not going to be any Social Security, right? Keep hearing these horror stories. So I'm going to break that down briefly here. One of the challenges with Social Security is the aging population. Back in 1950, there were 16 people paying into Social Security for every one that collected. And they're estimating by 2035, in 14 years, there's only going to be 2 people paying in for every one collecting. And that's kind of the genesis of the baby boomers coming of age and retiring. So there's not enough money going into Social Security. Here's some of the good news, though. And so for the people who feel Social Security is going to go broke, it's a little tough for that to happen. And that's why I put this in the presentation tonight. And it is an important foundation for people. Social Security is made up of 2 funds. One is an excess trust fund. The other one is ongoing payroll taxes. The short version of this is the assumption that Social Security will go broke is not really accurate. The excess trust fund is starting to get depleted. And these were excess payroll taxes over the decades that were collected and deposited into a trust fund. Now, because there's less people paying into Social Security, that trust fund is scheduled to be depleted by 2034. If they don't figure out how to replenish that trust fund, it states here that you probably will only get 78% of your Social Security benefit. That goes for whether you're collecting it or you're about to collect it. But a lot can change in the next 13 years. So Social Security won't go broke, but it may get diminished if they can't figure out how to replenish that trust fund. So the concept on Social Security is really about what we call maximization. And I use this case here at age 66 for what's called full retirement age. The short version of that is this is an unreduced Social Security benefit. This is 100% of what your benefit says on your statement. For most people, it's between age 66 and 67. And you'll see in this example, it's $2,000. If you elect it as early as age 62, it's a 25% reduction, and that's a permanent reduction. If you wait all the way out to age 70, well, they'll give you 8% a year growth, plus any cost of livings. And I've asked people for years when it comes to Social Security, what other investment do you have that's guaranteed at 8% a year plus cost of livings? The biggest kickback on it is, what if I don't live long enough? And that is certainly a personal decision and a health decision, but it is a very valuable component in retirement that we're talking about tonight that gives you guarantees. Here's a version of the case studies here, and here's a couple that wanted to know, should they take benefits as early as age 62, or should they actually maximize the benefits and wait? And you'll see in this example, Jack's full retirement age benefit was $2,400, Diane was $900, and we factor in some life expectancy there. And you'll see the strategy actually said that Jack should wait out to age 70, maximize the benefit, and then Diane would collect her benefit at 66 and 6 months. So the goal tonight is not to help you understand the strategies that exist with Social Security, but there are many that exist to maximize the benefit. The big issue here was, had they elected the benefit as early as possible, based on those life expectancies, they would have yielded about 710,000 as early as possible, versus 832,000 by delaying Social Security, for a pretty substantial difference of $122,000. But what does that look like in a retirement analysis? So I'm going to show you that same software. Again, nothing to do with investing. We're going to keep the inflation out this time. And we're going to show you the same couple. They have $425,000. We're going to grow the money again at 4%. Their expenses are $5,800, and I'm going to keep the inflation out of the conversation because you already know how that can change this outlook here. In this case, they're both going to take Social Security at as early as age 66. Pretty simple. What happens here is you'll see the Social Security benefits for the two of them at age 66, $4,454. So they're both going to take it when they retire. This column here will address their negative cash flow. So by taking it early, they are creating a lifetime negative cash flow here, and it's starting at $1,423. And the only reason it's going up is because of that assumed inflation. And based on taking it at age 66, you'll see, in theory, they could run out of money as early as age 89. Again, there's ways to address that potentially. It's working longer, it's saving more, it's getting a better rate of return. But based on those assumptions and taking Social Security at 66, the plan goes to 89. What we're going to do here is we're going to run the same scenario, except just one person is going to wait out to age 70. The other one is going to take it at 66. One person is going to earn those credits and let it grow at 8% a year. And watch what happens. Now look at the early years now. When someone delays Social Security, instead of being short $1,400 a month, they're short $3,200 a month. So this is a commitment financially that's not for everyone. But by waiting, you'll see at age 70, look at that Social Security benefit. It jumps up to 58.15. That's just because one person decided to delay. And guess what? The plan now goes out to age 94 instead of 89. They've added 5 years to the plan by figuring out what to do with Social Security. Again, nothing to do with investments, expenses, inflation are all the same. So understanding one of the components that we're talking about tonight, Social Security, is very critical. Here's another concept on taking Social Security earlier. You'll see here's a couple that collects Social Security early and John gets a pension. And you see their monthly income is $4,800. If we take out for taxes, their monthly needs are $5,000. So they have a shortfall every month, kind of what I showed you in the software. The reason I'm showing you this is sometimes that software can look a little confusing. And by knowing that they have a shortfall, it tells me they're going to need at least $278,000 to supplement because they took Social Security early. We're going to compare that to them waiting out to age 66 and 67. We're going to include the pension. We're going to take out the same amount for taxes, but guess what? Because they delayed, they now have a surplus. What was the challenge in doing that? They're going to need $163,000 up front to delay that Social Security. So the choice is, depending on how long you live, draw down more money or draw down some money early and create a better situation. The last tab that we're going to touch on here is market volatility and income. And I have some interesting charts in here to help you understand this. And what is meant by the term market volatility? Well, volatility is an investment term that describes when a market or security experiences a period of unpredictable and sometimes sharp price movement. If you're an investor, you should know that you shouldn't be afraid of the market because historically the market always does what? It comes back. People forget that I'm an investor besides a money manager. So including myself last year, and I don't know about you, Michael, I was concerned. I don't normally get concerned, but I never lived in a pandemic. I never saw countries shut down. Now, for some people, that's an opportunity because the market was down 37% in 1 month. How often do you get a chance to buy at that type of discount, right? But historically, it usually takes a few years to come back. So market volatility can really affect the successful portion of the retirement. What I did here is to help you understand what's called recovery. Last year, the market came back in 6.5 months. We've never seen that. I've never seen that. 1987, the market lost 31%, took 19 months to recover. 2000, we dropped 49%. It took 56 months to recover. And the reason I'm showing you this is the next slide I'm going to show you while you're withdrawing your money, how that can actually play havoc on your retirement. 2008, 57%, the banking scandal, 49 months to recover. You know what's sad about, I've told people for the last couple of years now, it's been in my lifetime and in yours, the 3 largest corrections in the last 20 years are all man-made. We had the terrorism years, which was man-made. We had the banking scandal of 2008, and then we had a natural occurrence called COVID. And so none of these, so you understand, the corrections weren't based on corporate profits. They weren't based on anything but man-made issues. And so you have to wonder as you watch the market for the last 12 years, back to that stimulus, how much longer is that sustainable? Because I've never seen the market go up 12 years in a row like it has. And so historically, you want to prepare. Here was last year, down 37% in a little more than 4 months, the market recovered. So the market corrections and the sequence of returns, which I'm going to show you, are pretty profound. So we're going to talk about market corrections, volatility, and sequence of returns in tandem. And so the risk of receiving lower or negative returns early in a period when withdrawals are made from an investment portfolio is known as sequence of return risk. And if you're taking withdrawals from your portfolio, the order of the sequence of investing returns can significantly impact the portfolio. So what does that mean? This chart here will show you some unbelievable sequences, and this is really, really interesting to me. Now, this goes way back, the first one, 1929 to 1954, a 25-year period where the market returned 1.69%. So basically, when we were talking about CDs, you could have done better in a CD back in those days, right? A very long period of time, if you were drawing money from your assets, this may have not worked out very well. You'll find historically, after a bad sequence, you get some of the best sequences ever. So if you were going to retire 1954 to 66, the market returned 154%. You could have taken out 10% a year and your account value probably would have never fluctuated. The worst time ever, 2001 and 2009, the period I just spoke about. An 8-year period where the market actually took a negative 25% return. There used to be a saying in my industry, which you can't say any longer. And it used to be, if you invested your money for 10 years, you never lost money. And that all changed in 2001 to 2008 period here. So the sequence of returns are important. Let's break it down again on a simpler chart, because I like to break some of this down on a simpler version here. Let's take two investors. They're both going to start with $100,000. They're both going to take out $5,000 a year to supplement retirement. They have the same goals, the same needs. The investor in blue will get a positive sequence soon as that person retires. And so you see the blue line going up, they're taking out $5,000 and the returns are great. This is a very positive sequence for this person. The negative numbers come on the back end. And you'll see at the end of the 15-year period, the investor has $105,000 left. And they said, I should have retired even before that. I have more than when I started. The investor in green is going to get the same exact numbers, but they're inverted. The investor in the green gets the negative numbers to start with and the positive on the end. And guess what? The investor in green has $35,000 at the end of 15. So the market volatility and the sequence of returns are really, really important for you to understand. One last thing, there's a client of mine now, which is talks about the sequence of returns and something called the rule of 4%. Most of you may have heard this. It's out on all the financial channels. It's all over the internet. And it says, in general, if you take 4%, you should never run out of money. The problem with that is they're not giving you the whole story. It's 4% of what's in the account, not what you need. So what does that mean? Here's the gentleman I met in 2009. And he said to me, when he came to my office, he said, you know, I'm really upset with my advisor after almost 20 years, because he said, I can take 4% and I would never run out. And I said, well, what did you need? And he said, well, I needed $40,000 a year when I retired. And I said, well, that means quite simply that you had $1 million. He said, yes. That's where the disconnect is. It's not what you need, it's 4% of what's in the account. And so here's unfortunately what happened to him. Here's $1 million, the stock market was great, he took out the 4%. The next year, he's got $1,151,000, and he thinks this is easy. Well, the next year, remember we talked about inflation? You see that withdrawal column? If you need $40,000 in 1 year, you better figure on needing a little bit more every year due to inflation. That was not something they factored in. There's the inflation. The next year, the distribution is 41.2, and good news, he's still only taking 3.98%. Unfortunately, the market has 3 bad years in a row here. And you see the 821, and then another year, the market's down 23%. And guess what? Now taking out 6.91%. That's where the rule comes apart. And I think this is one of the most important things I could teach you if you have dependency on your money. It's not of what you need. So for this person, the stars were aligned in the first year. He had $1 million, he needed 4%, 40,000. The problem is you have to take what's in the account if you want to have a chance of the rule succeeding. Still no guarantees, but as long as you're making a fair rate of return, it should work. You'll see here in 2008, the account started coming back because the markets had some good years, only for that big number to happen. And at this point, he's taking out 11.89%. And quite honestly, I met him in 2009 when he had $386,000. And he said to me, what do you think I can do? And I said, you could stop taking out 40 some odd $1,000 because the percentage is too high. And he said to me, you didn't hear me. I told you I needed at least 40,000. So the reason I'm telling you this is so important because a lot of Americans depend on their retirement savings and to live off of in retirement. And it's 85% of the people that come through my office. Very few people are fortunate enough to have a great base income, pension, Social Security, and other things. And so if you're going to adhere to this 3 or 4% rule, make sure you're taking 3 or 4% of what's in the account. Because again, when he came to my office, he had 386,000 and 4% would have been about $17,000. He went back to work. He was fortunate enough to actually get a job. Markets came roaring back. That's our last 12 years. He reaccumulated, he retired again. So let's take a look here. One of the challenges with retirement software is an industry regulation, not a MIC regulation. We have to show you what's called static return. I can't actually show you what the markets did in the software for the last 20 years, because you know the old saying, past performance is no indication of the future. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a couple 65 years old, and I increased their savings, $750,000 of tax deferred money. I left the $4,000 in Social Security to keep this simple for you guys. $6,000 a month in expenses. So they're spending more than what they have on income. Maybe they could have waited longer on Social Security. And we're going to grow the money again at 4% and 2% inflation. So what happens here? So if they start with the $750,000, that net monthly cash flow is negative. So now we know the money is needed to draw income. Maybe it's 4%, maybe it's 3%. This is something you should figure out, or your advisor should figure out is, look, here's the percentage that you're going to need based on your current account value. And so you'll see here, based on this scenario, not too bad again. Plan goes out to age 94. So far, so good. How can a market correction change that? So you see here, I have all the same parameters again. Didn't want to confuse you tonight. These are all the same parameters. The only thing I did, I put a hypothetical 20% loss in year 5. So remember, if we went back here, the plan lasted out to age 94. By putting in a 20% loss in year 5, not a major stock market loss, you'll see now the plan actually runs out at age 87. So the sequence of returns, the market corrections, and the withdrawal rate of your money changes dramatically, like I showed you in that history of the gentleman I met many years ago. So these are the 4 components that we try to address. You see the plan lost 6 years here. And so the 4 critical components to a successful retirement: don't underestimate the impact of inflation. It's real, it can be sustainable, and it can devalue the purchasing power of your money. Plan to at least somehow keep pace with inflation. Whether you do it through fixed instruments, insurance-based products, dividends, stocks, whatever you find, try to make sure your money keeps pace with inflation at best. Assessing what your tax rate is now and what it may be in the future, along with possible tax increases, can have a bearing on what your money is actually worth after taxes. So do a tax checkup on your savings and your investments. Determine what kind of tax rate you're going to be in the future and where you think taxes might be headed to find out, does it work? Social Security is a major component for most Americans in retirement, and determining when the appropriate time to take this benefit is a key decision to make, as I shared with you. And market correction, sequence of returns, and withdrawing the money in retirement is a fact of life for most Americans. So make sure you understand how your money is invested, what income it can produce, and the risks that you face by generating that income. So I think, Mike, I kept it right at an hour. And so if you have questions, comments, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like, and I'm happy to answer as many questions. Yes?
There's recently discussion about legislation that would impact Roth conversions. Just some context about what was the concern and then where that ended up.
Yeah, so his question on Roth conversions, we utilize Roth conversions a lot. One of the concepts is As a tax advisor, all I would tell you if I were the person with the tax deferred money is I want to figure out how to pay taxes at my lowest possible rate. There's actually ways, if you didn't know it, not to pay taxes, right? But you have to understand those strategies. With that being said, I like taking money from a tax deferred account, which is this question on conversion, paying taxes on the seed. Let's just say it's $100,000. Paying my taxes and converting it to Roth, which is tax-free and it can grow tax-free forever. And then when I need money, I access tax-free money. The challenge with that is paying the taxes. So you want to do it at the best possible time at the lowest possible tax rate. His question is, there's talk about stopping that. One of the problems with answering that question is there's nothing there yet other than talk, right? So I never talk politics, but I'll give you the answer somewhat politically. Tax is law. So you can't come in with executive decision and change laws. You can create other things, but you can't change tax law. So without the House, the Senate, and the President's seal of approval, it's very hard to change tax law. So you see right now, they want to take the 37% top bracket and change it to 39.6. That's called compromise. That's not asking for much. On the Roth conversion, if you make too much money, they want to stop you from converting. But if you're not earning money, well, then you can convert money. Just don't go up to whatever number they're talking about, because a conversion is actually earned income anyway, right? So right now, they're talking about anyone above $500,000 of income can't do a conversion. But most likely that person wouldn't be earning $500,000 their whole life anyway. The challenge with conversions on top of that is when you hit age 72 required, and you're young, obviously, but when you hit the required minimum distribution age, you cannot take that distribution and put it in a Roth. You lose that advantage. Now you can take excess. So as an example, if I had to take $20,000 and it put me in a 22% tax bracket, but yet I can take another $50,000 and still stay in a 22% bracket, why wouldn't I do it? Right? So the Roth conversion, I think, is here for a while. I don't think there'll be dramatic changes, but I don't know, because without all three bodies and with the Senate split at 50-50, I think it's going to be very hard to have dramatic tax changes right now. But it's a guess. Yes.
What are the current parameters that allow a Roth conversion?
So one of the misconceptions is people think they have to be working to do a Roth conversion, and that's only to contribute. You need earned income to contribute. You can convert money at any time. You just have to be willing, my terminology is to cross the tax bridge, right? So let's say I wanted to convert $100,000 this year, put it in the Roth. Well, I cross the bridge, I pay the taxes. But back to timing, I want to do it at the most advantageous time. I don't want to push myself in higher tax brackets to accomplish this. So I want to build a strategy over the next 10 or 15 years and figure out how to do it the least expensive way, but being cognizant of the fact that taxes are going higher in 5 years, because unfortunately, back to politics, the easiest way to give you a tax increase, everyone in the room, is to do nothing. And that's usually what politicians do. So in 5 years, that tax code that was put in sunsets. And all you have to do is just let it sunset. And your taxes are going up by 3 or 4%. But you can convert money at any time. The other thing you have to be, no, but the other thing you have to be careful about is if you start collecting Social Security, there's what's called an Irma Tax, IRMAA. And if your earned income is too high, you can wind up paying considerably more for Medicare Part B, which is about $140 a month now. So if you convert too much, you could easily pay $500 a month. In my opinion, a small price to pay if you're converting a good chunk of money. But me, I would want to have either taxable money in retirement or tax-free money. I don't really want tax-deferred money. The only time, in my opinion, it makes sense to tax defer is if I know I'm making so much money today and I'm going to be in such a lower tax bracket in the future, then sure, I want to take advantage and tax defer. But I'm not a huge advocate of it. Yes?
What's the strategy about converting ahead of time so that managing what you expect to? That's one of those.
Right.
I don't hear people involve state tax in that analysis, but if you think you're going to be retired in a long run economy, like Texas and Florida, little the liabilities covered by the time you save it to pay back.
Oh, yeah, transition to a different state obviously plays a big factor. You know, state taxes, people ask me all the time, as an example, you know, should I move to a cheaper state? And here's my take on that. If I happen to love Connecticut, and if my state income tax is 5% and I make $100,000 in retirement, I'm not leaving for $5,000, right? But if I'm considering conversions and it's going to cost me 5% here and I'm moving to Florida in 2 years, yeah, it's a consideration. But again, that 5% in my example that you're saving, it might cost you more than that in 2025. I really believe if you came to my tax presentation, there was a guy in this area, actually, his name was David Walker. He actually ran for governor a few years back and he didn't get much traction. He was the government's tax controller for years. He worked under Clinton, he worked under both parties. And his commentary is it's just math. If you have $30 trillion in debt and you want to even start paying it down, forget about paying it off, well, then you have to raise taxes because the interest on the debt alone is strangling the country. And one of the reasons I think interest rates are low right now is not just to stimulate the economy, it's to avoid high interest payments on the debt. So I'm looking at today and saying, I want to try to get away from taxes because I don't think the picture is too rosy. And I think taxes are a very slow moving vehicle that when they start going the other direction, it will go on for a long time. And that's the problem with the devaluing of the currency, the inflation that we talked about, people buying Bitcoin because they believe, I think foolishly, that the dollar is going to be worthless. I don't think the dollar will ever be worthless because how would the country function? How would it borrow money? If the society went to a Bitcoin, what would the government do now? They want $1 trillion for infrastructure. Where would they get it from? They don't control it. So, but yeah, so yeah, moving to a different state is definitely a factor in the conversion process. But me personally and the clients I work with, we're just trying to get to tax-free as soon as possible. The other thing with taxes is if you collect Social Security, when you start taking these distributions, it creates taxes on your Social Security. I see couples nowadays, $60,000 of their Social Security benefits being taxed on the federal level because their income is too high. That's another savings that you can plan for in the future if you get away from the taxes by the time you're in your 70s. There's a lot to it. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you a short answer, but there's a lot of planning and tax advising. Anyone else? I'm here for a few minutes if you'd like to come up and ask a question. If you don't want to ask it in front of the group, otherwise, I thank you for the time. If you would like to, oh, thank you. It's very nice. Thank you. If you'd like to hand in the form, I would suggest put it upside down up here for your privacy. If not, again, keep the information, keep the articles, and it was a pleasure to meet you all. Thank you.